We are in studio today with Debbie Critchfield. She's a candidate for Idaho State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Glad to have her in our neck of the woods today.
Glad to be here.
First of all, tell us about how have you enjoyed your trip over the state over the last weeks, months?
It's been incredible to see our state in a way that I never thought that I would, and having deliberate trips to go to places that I may or may not have been able to see. Rather than just, I'm going to go see somewhere because we want to go spend a couple days, but to get into the heart of Idaho has been incredible. We've got an amazing state.
That's cool. Yeah, there's a lot of beautiful sights to see.
Absolutely, top to bottom.
So, talk about your platform. You're running, as I said, for Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Idaho. Why did you decide to put your hat in the ring and run for that position?
I am excited about the opportunities that we have right now to create a system, an educational system that will meet the needs of the 21st century student and the workforce needs of a growing state. And I've used my experience over the last 7 years on Idaho State Board of Education, and then previous to that 10 years on a local school board in Cassia County, to combine all of that, that learning, that training, the relationships, and what I believe is important for education in Idaho. I put all that together to say, here's the vision of where we need to be. I have felt that there hasn't been a vision, and what are those outcomes that we're looking for? How are we going to get them? And I believe I can bring that to the table. So
this is a good opportunity for voters to get to know you a little bit. Tell us your background. Where are you from? Tell us about your family, those kind of things.
Okay. I have lived in Oakley for 30 years, and so I claim Idaho as home now. My husband and I have farmed there. He's a fourth generation farmer. We raised 4 children in the community and had a wonderful experience growing our family there in a rural setting, which adds to another level of experience of understanding of how students are different around the state. As I mentioned earlier, spent 10 years on a local school board, half of those years as chair. 7 years Idaho State Board of Education, the last 2 immediate years as president, and then everything and anything you can think of related to education in the last nearly 20 years, from state task forces to working with groups to develop apprenticeships, internships. I also served as a library trustee in my area and have just a number of experiences of working in the community and championing the cause of Idaho.
With some of that past experience, is there one particular thing you're proud of as far as your accomplishments in that role?
A number of things, and I guess I'll start with the local level as a community and board member. In Cassia, I was able to contribute to the formation of a federally registered apprenticeship program for machine operators. It took in 2 school districts, a number of industry, the College of Southern Idaho, the Department of Labor. There was a great collaboration that took place that allowed students as juniors and seniors to participate in the workforce while getting trained, that provided them a job upon completion and when they graduated from high school. I'm very proud of that and believe that should be a model of how we help students to be successful outside of high school. I'm also very proud of some work that I did with a local board member in Cassia, not as a board member, but as an employee of the school district that I work in. I guess I forgot to mention that I'm the communications director for Cassia County School District. And so talking about the need for emotional and behavioral supports for kids and for families, we've had a lot of great discussion in the state about the mental health needs of our students, particularly the growing rates of suicide. And so a friend of mine who is a current board member in Cassia and I got together, we had this conversation on how is it that we're going to best support students and best support parents who need to support their students. And we created a what we would call a student assistance program that's available K-12, any student in the district. They're able to access outside licensed counseling and therapist, and we connect them. The name of the program is called Connect. The school system is there to identify, to talk to parents, and it's about referring out and referring up. so that parents have the tools and the strategies that they need to help their student, because they're in the best place for that. So the creation of Connect, I think, again, would be a great model in the state for how schools support what needs to happen in the home and with parents to help their kids. And then on the state level, thinking about the last 7 years, one of the very first things that I did as a brand new member of Idaho State Board of Education was bring forward a change to remove the high stakes nature of testing for high school students. If you recall, a number of years ago, in order for a student to graduate from high school, they had to pass a test in the 10th grade. And at the time, I had students in school, and coming off of being a local board member, everything about that didn't make sense to me, that the culmination of everything that you had done in high school was tied, or throughout your whole academic experience, was tied to one test one day as a 10th grader. And so I brought that change forward to the full board and removed that requirement. We still test, but you don't have to have passed that. And then I guess most recently, thinking about last year, the COVID school year, I chaired the statewide committee to reopen schools. We wanted to get kids back to school in person, face to face. And I worked with school districts to develop their plans. How do we set forth the right safety protocols while thinking about the goal of having kids back in school? And we know that for the most part that was successful in Idaho compared to other states in the nation, so I'm proud of that. And then I guess the other thing for last year, just again, thinking broadly of things, my work with the governor's office on the Strong Families, Strong Students initiative that allowed parents to make decisions to supplement the education of their children, whether it was buying a tutor or paying for a tutor, purchasing a device, paying for internet. Parents had a lot of needs last year, and the federal stimulus money that came in, we were able to work with the governor's office to put something forward. So. It's probably more than you bargained for, but after 20 years, it's hard. It's like, what's your favorite child? You don't.
Of course, yeah.
There's a lot of good things.
You do all these things, and you're proud of a lot of your accomplishments. I'm glad you mentioned the COVID-19 issue, because I do want to talk about that a little bit later. Speaking now as as a candidate for state superintendent, a couple things. What, in your mind, is the greatest educational challenge facing Idaho? And if you're elected, what will you do to help combat that? Or solve it?
I believe there are two primary ones that I'll take a few minutes to focus on. I'm going to start with reading, the ability for our students to read. We have set third grade as a benchmark, which may be too late and too narrow of a way to say, oh, by third grade. We want students to read at first grade and at second grade. And so all of the components of literacy are very critical. How we prepare and have our teachers be able to identify struggling readers so that they don't go through school and get to the 9th grade and not be able to read, I think is very important. There's a lot of great national programs out there. There's one that Mississippi has successfully used. It's called The Science of Reading, where you're essentially teaching all teachers to be reading specialists and to identify dyslexia and a number of other things. It may not be that a teacher is necessarily trained on how to work with a student with specialized needs, but identifying what those needs are and the variety of ways that students learn, I think, is very critical. The other priority for me, when we talk about what are the educational needs, we've got to think differently and talk differently about the high school experience. I believe that training our students to be prepared for the workforce needs of a growing state is critical. And it's not just about supplying workers for industry and so forth, but it's about providing kids the tools that they need to be confident that they can do something. So I know things, you add, now I can do things, and what are the options and the opportunities that are available for me outside of the high school experience as they leave the system.
So let's get into a few issues. Over the last several years, there's been a lot of educational related issues in the news nationwide and in Idaho that have been hot button issues. Like I said, you mentioned a few of them already. Let's talk about critical race theory.
Okay.
That's been a school curriculum that's been introduced nationwide in the last several years, and even in Idaho, it's been a topic of conversation. Earlier this week, there was a resolution in the Idaho legislature that called out critical race theory, 1619 Project, and other similar types of programs as divisive content. And last year, the legislature passed a bill prohibiting schools from basically teaching CRT, or the principles covered in CRT. So, just your take on all of that conversation, all those things in the legislature.
So I'm going to work backwards, thinking of where we are now and why we're here. So you mentioned legislation that was passed last year. It was actually House Bill 377, and I was the only education official at the table when that was crafted. And so I was in the room at the time, and the bill makes it illegal, if that's a word that you want to use, which it is, for school districts to expend public funds to purchase materials that teach critical race theory. And that was a response to what we were hearing in the state. The legislature was hearing it, Education Inc. was hearing it as well, that this was not material or a topic that parents believed were appropriate for young children. And I agree with that. As we both know, it's a graduate level theory that adults pay for in graduate school to discuss. And so our teachers aren't even prepared to have the type of conversation that you would need to have around that. And so I believe that Idaho was one of the first states in the country to be proactive about that. And then as we got into the summer, there was more and more discussion about, well, is it in Idaho schools? What does it look like? Who's bringing it in there? How do we ensure that we have factual, historical conversations with our kids about history and race and race relations? And so as I've talked about this and gone around the state and worked with a variety of people, my conclusions are parents are still concerned that it's in the classroom. Schools are saying that they don't have it there, and policymakers are unsure what to do. And I think there are a number of ways to approach this. From my perspective, I do not believe that it's an appropriate topic for our children. And I have not seen a systemic use of it in curriculum or in books in Idaho. I've talked to parents and teachers who maybe have brought in something into the classroom that was unrelated to a textbook. It was supplementary material, or perhaps a conversation started in a high school class about race relations. I believe that when we present information about history and where we've been and how we want to move forward from here, that we want historical facts. We want the full portrayal of what history was. That's how our students know how to gain respect. How do we avoid those things? And frankly, recognizing that our country has really triumphed over a lot of discriminatory practices that I didn't do, that you didn't do, and that I'm not responsible for. But what is my responsibility in the context that I have now? We want our students to have a full picture of those things and nobody to walk away feeling as though they're less than someone else. And so when I talk to administrators and teachers and parents, they want assurance that what you're telling me is actually what's happening in the classroom. I've seen a lot of great examples of districts who have opened up opportunities for parents to come into the classroom, for parents to see the books and the materials. Reestablishing trust, I think, is critical right now, and then having those open lines of communication are also very critical to overcoming where the fears are.
Another issue that people talk a lot about is the go-on rate. The number of students who graduate from high school and go on to some form of higher education. That go-on rate has fallen every year since 2017. Just the hard data is that 37% of the state's high school graduates as of 2021 went straight to college. I'm sure there's a number of factors there that they haven't included as part of that data. But want to share your perspective on that.
Yes, this is one of my favorite data points, not because we want to celebrate the fact that we're declining, but I want to pair it with another important data point. We know that in high school, 80% of all high school students take at least one form of dual credit class that's attached to a college credit while they're in high school. So we've got the number of 80%, and then we have that number of 37%. So what that tells me is that there's a disconnect. Our students want to be prepared. They want to have access to things that help them to be successful in whatever their decision making is beyond high school. But it's a mismatch to what our students are doing. And so when we think about going back to how we reimagine and recreate our high school experience, our students are asking for more opportunities. They're asking to have the skills and to have the knowledge that they need. We need, as a system, we need to align those with what our students are interested in and what their goals are. I know that the 37% number doesn't take in military. There's a number of kids that go into the military, but the military doesn't share those numbers with Idaho, or with anyone for that matter. We also, as a state, in that metric, we don't build into it students that leave for some type of religious service, a missionary service after high school, and then come back and go to a tech school or enter into college or whatever it is that they do. And so I know that captured in that 30% or not captured are important decisions and good choices that students are making, but I have to go back to that 80% number. 80% of our kids want to be prepared in some form. We are, as a system, need to align how those choices make sense for kids, that they know that what they're learning applies to that. It's connecting those dots that I think is so critical.
And then let's get to this COVID-19 issue that you were talking about earlier, which, as you mentioned, going back to March of 2020, this global pandemic hits the country, and we're all kind of shocked and surprised by what happens. And in response to all of that, we shut down schools for
the rest of the school year.
It ended up being the rest of the school year, and students and teachers had to adapt to online learning and very quickly.
Yes.
And then by September, when the next school year began, most of the schools in the state returned to in-person learning. But, your comments about how all of that played out.
Yeah, what an interesting time to be alive. Education has experienced the biggest disruption of our modern times. And we look back, and I think I'm like other people, and it's easier to say now, well, we should have this and we should have that. So I look back with that same lens and I say, we got out too early and we stayed out. We didn't need to stay out till that school year was over, when you look at the trends. And so there's that one side of the coin, again, looking back. Or some will say, well, maybe staying out is what helped mitigate some of the, infection rates. I don't know. I'm not a doctor that way, but looking back, the soft closure for schools from the state level, I had school and community leaders that called me while I was on the president of the board, saying we don't know what to do. And the Board of Education no one knew what to do. And so at the time the decision was made, well, the governor made the decision for everyone to be in quarantine for a period of time, and then schools weren't sure how to get back into it. And so there was asking for help on the state level, help us know what to do in our communities. And so from the Board of Education, we went into soft closure. Again, looking back, I think we could have handled that differently. As soon as we were in soft closure mode, which I believe was the beginning of April-ish, middle of April, I immediately began talking with districts, how are we going to get you back into school in August? That became the focus. We want you in school, we need you face-to-face, we need kids learning. And so I chaired the governor's Reopen Idaho Schools Committee, working with districts on plans, working with district health on how are you going to help support us so that we can get kids back. I advocated to our governor that there would be no statewide mandates for school children or for school districts. Let local districts decide how to do that. We talked about my travels of the state a little bit earlier. There were very distinct differences around our state. Preston, in their setting, they were able to do things that perhaps Nampa wasn't. And so it made no sense to me to say here was a uniform approach to how you're going to do COVID. And I was happy to see that districts were able to do that. Now within their own local decision making, they still needed help. They needed a partner from the state to be able to say, how are we going to do this? I was able to work, and frankly, one of the reasons that I got into the race was because of my extensive work with districts in helping them, figure out how they're going to make their decisions. There's not a mystery on districts that successfully had kids in school last year. They had a plan that they stuck to. They had a strong board that worked together, and an effective superintendent. So you took those three ingredients, and that's what we saw around the state. There were obviously times where people had to come out of school and go back in, but the districts that were able to successfully manage and keep their kids in school, even without masks, had those three pieces in place.
Have you seen any negative long-term impacts of that shutdown? For students.
I think we'll probably be recovering, if that's the right word to use, for some time. But I actually believe it'll be less about academic recovery and learning loss than it will be about behavioral and mental issues surrounding that. I think when all of the data comes out and we start looking at student performance and achievement, I believe that Idaho as a whole will likely fare better than most of the states in our region, if not nationally, due to the fact that we had kids in school. That's a difference maker. It absolutely was. And I hear now from school leaders, they're telling me this year is as hard as last year, but for different reasons. They're dealing with students who don't want to be in school, who aren't living up to any type of expectations. If I come today or leave early, that doesn't matter, it's unimportant to me. I think in the relaxing of so many rules and expectations that we're now at this place where we've got to bring our students back up to, there are some things we do want to do the same. We do expect you to be here. We do expect you to be engaged. And then the social issues and behavioral health issues that surround isolation and loneliness and feeling disconnected are challenges that our districts are going to deal with for some time.
Some of this you've already answered, but any concerns about COVID going forward?
I think we're always going to be dealing with COVID. Or something. If it's not this, it'll again, not being a scientist, but we have the flu. I mean, there are things that we just live with. And I believe that people have made up their minds how they want to live COVID. And so I cannot imagine a time, you hate to say things will never happen because I wouldn't have, said this would have happened, but that we would get to a place where we would have to have a complete shutdown as far as schools and some of those. I don't want to be to that place. We've figured out how to do this. And so we have this opportunity in the lessons that we've just learned to not only know how to adapt to changes, but to create the system that suits our needs.
As you're traveling throughout the state and meeting with people all the time, nationwide it's kind of a divisive time. Yeah. People are very divided, but as you've talked with residents of the state of Idaho, just in general, how are people doing? How are they feeling? What do they want?
Well, I like the want. The feeling, people are feeling optimistic about education, but there's also a sense that where are we going to be? What's the vision? Feeling that things are lacking in leadership. I hear that across the board. What's the plan? We've just come off of this interesting learning experience in education called COVID. How do we take that and transform what we're doing to fit our needs? And so I hear that. So, and that's encouraging for me, obviously, as a candidate, that people are ready for change. They're excited about what we can do and how we meet the needs of our students and our communities. Communities are built upon healthy schools. And as a state leader, I have the opportunity to assist that, to advocate for that, to champion education to be a leader in that area.
Well, we've been pleased to talk with Debbie Critchfield, who again is running for Idaho State Superintendent of Public Instruction. The primary is May 17th, and the general election is November 8th. Appreciate your time today, Debbie. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have, yeah.
I guess that I would emphasize again, and I don't know that we can't emphasize it enough, that education is not an outcome. Education is not the objective. Education is the vehicle to provide what our students need, whatever that is, how we create the pathways, the opportunities, and the options, and that our students, as they go through a traditional public system or public charter school, that the result of that is that they leave believing, I can make decisions, I can be an adult that's able to support myself and support a family and contribute. Those are the types of outcomes that I'm looking at, and the measures of how we get there are reflected in some of the things that we talked about. But ultimately, we want to create productive adults that will then contribute back. And we have this wonderful opportunity in Idaho to have that system built around our students.
Well, thanks again, Debbie.
Thank you.
Thanks for swinging by. I'm Rhett Nelson with EastIdahoNews.com. Thanks for watching.